The largest annual business and technology conference in South America is the annual SAP Brazil User Forum in Sao Paulo. Earlier this year, I was privileged to be invited to deliver the keynote address to over 2,000 people attending this year's SAP Forum. You'll see this address, which lasts about 1 hour, coming up momentarily. Don't be surprised to hear me speaking Portuguese for the first 30 seconds or so of the speech. After all, I was speaking in Brazil. But I quickly switched to English, and I hope you'll enjoy it.
Bom dia, senhoras e senhores. Como podem ver, eu não falo português muito bem, mas eu falo um pouco de inglês. Então, com sua permissão, hoje eu vou falar em inglês. Muito obrigado. Thank you very much. And while we're on the subject of language, I have a question for you. If a person who can speak 2 languages is bilingual, and a person who can speak 3 languages is trilingual, does anyone know what you call a person who speaks only 1 language? American, yes. So, for those of you who, in addition to being Brazilian, are at least in this way a little bit American, we have translators, and we thank the translators for your help today. The Queen Mary, sailing from Southampton, England, for 50 years in the 20th century, she and her sister ocean liners dominated the market for transatlantic travel. Oh, it was possible to fly between, say, New York and London, but you could ask any executive at the ocean liner companies and they would tell you that why would any business person want to subject themselves to 24, 36 hours or more of noise and cramped discomfort when by riding on the ocean liner they could travel in comfort, even luxury, and arrive at their destination in less than a week. Oh no, they'd be glad to tell you, business travelers will always go by ocean liner when they cross the Atlantic. And so it was, until 1957, when Pan American Airlines introduced the Boeing 707 jet aircraft with service that traveled from New York to London in 8 hours. And in 6 months' time, the transatlantic passenger ship industry lost 90% of its business. Now, a company that has recognized the importance of innovation is ABA PGT Manufacturing in Manchester, Connecticut. They are a leading manufacturer of injection-molded plastic gears. Here's a photograph of their main manufacturing facility during the first shift, when their maintenance and repair engineers are on staff. On Friday afternoon, at the end of the day, when the engineers all went home, the last person out turned off the lights, but no one turned off the injection molding machines. And for the next 16 hours, those machines ran, cranking out hundreds of thousands of parts without anyone there to supervise that activity. And when the engineers came in the next morning and saw what had happened, they were absolutely delighted. Because this is what happens every night at ABA PGT Manufacturing. In fact, here's a photo of the same factory floor during the second and third shift. What they are doing is that they have put into place what are called autonomic or self-managing systems. Now, I want you to imagine how difficult your own personal life would be if you had to consciously manage all of the normally subconscious functions of your own human body. If you had to think about digesting the food you ate for breakfast this morning. If you had to focus on maintaining your body temperature or the balance of electrolytes in your bloodstream. And whatever else you do, don't forget to beat your heart once a second or so. You'd never get anything else done. But fortunately, we don't have to worry about these details because we have an autonomic nervous system that takes care of these details for us. It manages all of the normally subconscious functions of our bodies without our ever having to think about it. Unless there's a problem. So if our cells start to run low on fuel, we feel hungry and we eat. Or if there is something seriously wrong with our bodies, we feel pain or discomfort and we can take corrective action. But our businesses have long lacked any similar such systems to manage the day-to-day details of our business activities. And so we waste valuable time and resources simply maintaining the status quo in our organizations while failing to gain any meaningful competitive advantage in the marketplace. But fortunately, things have changed in the last few years. We didn't have much choice until a few years ago in how we managed our businesses. But with the advent of the internet, e-commerce, and technologies like web services and cognitive systems, we are now able to design and implement autonomic or self-managing business processes and the systems to support them. Now, some people get a little nervous about the idea of self-managing business processes. They're afraid that their dive into cognitive processes is going to end up looking too much like this young lady's first dive on vacation recently when she leaped off. Uh-oh. Huh? One more time? Oh, no, I don't think we want to do that. No, thank you. We'll just leave that to somebody else. But of course, you can't. And if you're going to be able to innovate effectively, you've got to use technology effectively to manage your business processes. So let's take a look at how far we have come and how fast technology has evolved and is continuing to evolve, to help us understand why we can do things that just a few years ago seemed impossible. In 1949, Popular Mechanics magazine made a very insightful forecast when they pointed out that computers in the future may weigh no more than 1.5 tons. Who can argue with that? But the fact of the matter is that technology trends show that computers are becoming more and more powerful. In the year 2000, a typical $1,000 home PC could process information at about the same rate of speed as the brain of an ant. By the year 2010, they will be able to process information at the same rate of speed as a mouse. Now, that doesn't seem like a big difference, but moving from insect to mammal is a huge leap in orders of magnitude, and that will continue on till by 2020 it will be able to process as fast as the brain of a human being. And by 2030, 1,000 times faster than the brain of a human being. Now, you might say, well, that's fine if we're just measuring the speed of processing information. But will computers ever really be able to think, to reason like humans do? And the answer, as we'll find out later this morning, is yes, in fact, they already do. But it's not just the power of computers and the speed of computers, it's also the bandwidth explosion that's having a huge impact on our ability to better manage our businesses and business processes. And by explosion, I don't just mean the explosion of email that's landing in your inbox, although you still have to keep up with it, as this poor fellow finds out the hard way when his boss walks in and says to him, "You should check your email more often. I fired you over 3 weeks ago." No, what I'm talking about is the fact that we are rapidly moving from a world of dial-up connections at 56,000 bits of data per second to cable modems and digital subscriber lines at speeds of millions of bits of data per second. Of course, for some people, this still isn't fast enough. As this one young lady tells her friend at the beach, "I'm never having children. I hear they take 9 months to download." And so the most advanced technology companies in the world, companies like the MIT Media Laboratory and Lucent Technologies, among others, have developed new communications capabilities, capable of transmitting data over a single fiber optic cable at speeds in excess of 1.6 terabits per second. That's 1.6 trillion bits of data per second. That's so much data communications capacity that in 1 second's time, you could transmit every word of every edition of the New York Times for 300 years. These huge data communications capabilities are already beginning to profoundly change the way we manage our lives, both personally and in our businesses. And to take a look at that, let me turn to the words of James Burke, author of the book Connections, and recognized as one of the world's foremost experts on the interplay between history and technology. James Burke points out that one force above all seems to facilitate innovation. The easier it is to communicate, the faster things happen. Every time there is an improvement in the technology with which people and ideas come together, major change ensues. Think about it. The Greek alphabet brought about philosophy, logic, and the democratic process. The printing press generated the entire scientific revolution. And the telegraph brought modern business methods into being and held global empires together. But never have we had a more significant improvement in the technology that brings ideas and people together than that brought about by the internet and related technologies in just the past few years. And people, we have only barely begun to scratch the surface of the changes in how business works that will take place as a result of these technologies. When you look at combining technologies like increasing communications bandwidth, the availability of wireless communications as a reliable business tool, radio frequency identification for tracking of physical objects, and global positioning system. And you integrate innovative technologies, all kinds of new things become possible. One such example is wireless, location-based retailing. So in the near future, it will not be at all difficult if you happen to be going to your favorite store and you see an item that you say, I would certainly like to have that. Wok pan in this case. Even better, I would like for my spouse or a good friend to buy it for me as a birthday present or a Christmas present. Fortunately, you have with you your wireless, GPS-equipped camera cell phone, and so you snap a picture of that item. The system, see, here this phone works right here. And your cell phone communicates wirelessly with an online wish list that you maintain. The wish list goes to the database of the store that you're in. How does it know what store you're in? It uses the global positioning system to determine that you're at Williams-Sonoma store on Roswell Road in Marietta, Georgia. And it looks up the various items in that store whose images are similar to the picture you've taken, shows you that there are several. You can select the one that you're interested in and have it stored on your wish list for future reference or for your friend or spouse to buy for you as a present if you wish. But you also might get an email from the store sometime in the next few weeks offering you a special deal, or if the circumstances are right, perhaps while you're standing right there in the store, a message flashes up on your camera cell phone and says to you, a special today just for you. You like this? $20 off. You can walk out with it today. Integrating these kinds of technologies allows us to think in new ways about how we manage our businesses and our processes. And while this kind of application of information technology seems very surprising when you look at it at first, if you follow all the various different tools and see how they have evolved and how they fit together, you realize that this kind of thing is truly inevitable. So this is what we can call an inevitable surprise. Now, it seems like a self-contradictory statement for something to be an inevitable surprise, but actually we're surrounded by inevitable surprises all the time. An excellent example you might have seen last week, the photo that came down from the Mars rover, aptly named Opportunity, showing a new discovery on the planet of Mars. An inevitable surprise, yes? Walmart's made it to Brazil. Mars is next. So, how will the future of business be different? What's it going to take to survive and succeed in the rapidly evolving global marketplace of the 21st century? Let me give you a few predictions for business changes already underway that will continue to accelerate in the next few years. Enterprise boundaries will continue to fade in relevance. They will become less significant as organizations collaborate across those boundaries. All information will be expected to be in real time or very close, within a matter of seconds of actual actions taking place. And the traditional supply chain will be replaced by a global, dynamic supply and demand chain. In the new business landscape, the action is at the edge. It's not just what's happening within your organization that's important. It's how you integrate what's happening inside your organization with what is happening in the organizations of your trading partners, large and small. That means it's going to be very important for you to listen to your trading partners. This can be a difficult lesson for some business people, because for too many business people, listening to their trading partners ends up being very much like this conversation between this woman and her husband when she says to him, "I'm sorry, dear, I wasn't listening. Could you repeat what you've said since we've been married?" You must listen to your trading partners. So today's business imperatives mean that you have to increase the degree to which you collaborate effectively with your trading partners, customers, suppliers, transportation carriers. You have to be increasingly agile in responding to an increasingly rapidly changing business environment. You have to accelerate the rate at which you bring new customer-oriented services to the marketplace. It's important to differentiate your business from your competition by putting more innovative business processes in place. And while doing all of the rest of these things, you need to continue to increase the productivity of your people. What this means is you've got to get back to basics, back to focusing on quality, speed, and productivity. You've got to be able to do things better, faster, and cheaper than your competition. It used to be that if you were ahead of your competition in any one of these areas, even better too, you could dominate your markets. Now you have to do all three just to continue to survive in your marketplace. But how do you do that? How do you simultaneously improve the quality of your products and services, reduce your business process cycle times, and cut your costs? The answer is very simple. You don't. Because you can't. Because it's impossible, given the way you do business today. You've got to radically redefine the way you manage your business if you're going to accomplish the objectives you must accomplish to survive and prosper in the 21st century global marketplace. The pyramid of prosperity in the 21st century has 4 corners or points: strategy, people, processes, and technology. What this means is that your business strategy must be to educate and motivate your people so that they will use the latest, most effective current and emerging technologies as enablers to redefine your business processes in ways that will best help you to achieve those strategic objectives. One of the most important such technologies is web services, or services-oriented architecture, whereby integrating systems through what's called an enterprise service bus, you enable your various systems throughout your organization, whether they're in the back office, plant, warehouse, retail floor, or wherever, to integrate with one another and to integrate with the systems of your customers and suppliers. Web services allow you to connect software applications and services across platforms, applications, and programming languages so that you can tie internal applications together and integrate extensive supply chains. This enables you to communicate critical information, such as monitoring up-to-date production figures across numerous suppliers. Now, a couple of interesting examples of companies already using web services very well happen to come from the healthcare industry in the States. McKesson, for example, allows their customers through their own in-house systems to check the latest pricing on McKesson's products in real time, because those in-house systems are integrated through web services with McKesson's pricing systems. Owens & Minor allows their customers to use their website to view videos demonstrating how the products that Owens & Minor distributes, but in this case the videos are actually originating from the manufacturer's web servers, in this case Kimberly-Clark. And they also allow their customers to access their catalog through their own in-house systems. So now, for example, if a nurse working on the patient care floor, checking the inventory of spinal anesthesia trays, realizes that we need to order more trays in order to meet the number of procedures we have scheduled this week, she can click on a link in her own system, and it will take her directly to the page in Owens & Minor's website for that specific type of spinal anesthesia tray, and showing the availability at the warehouse closest to her hospital and what the price is. She can then go ahead and enter the quantity that she wants to order, click a button, and the information is automatically updated in her purchasing system so that they can receive the trays when they're delivered to the hospital, and in her accounts payable system so that they will generate the payment for those trays correctly on receipt of the shipment. Now, if you compare that to the way things used to work in the old days, like 2 years ago, what the nurse used to have to do when she discovered she needed more spinal anesthesia trays was to go to a completely different computer, log on to Owens & Minor's website, identify herself again as an authorized buyer on behalf of the hospital, navigate her way all the way through to find the right page with the information about those spinal anesthesia trays, and place the order. Then go back to her own in-house system and rekey all of the same information back into her system so they could receive the shipment and pay for it correctly. Now, what do you think happens when one of Owens & Minor's competitors walks into that hospital today and says to the head nurse, "I think you should stop buying products from them and buy them from us instead, because we're going to cut the price by 2%. She's going to laugh him out of the hospital, because Owens & Minor, by integrating their systems with the internal hospital processes, has helped the hospital address one of its most critical constraints, the shortage of nurses. And by doing that, they have gained a strategic advantage that's going to be very, very difficult for a competitor to ever overcome. So web services allows for enhanced inter-enterprise integration. This also will allow organizations to much more effectively outsource those things that are not their core competencies. And this in turn facilitates a much more fully integrated global economy. So how, in this rapidly changing global economy, can we apply the concepts of autonomic or self-managing systems to achieve dynamic business process management? Traditional business process management can be effective in managing traditional static business processes. The problem is, as our world is changing so quickly, those static processes are not effective for very long. It's no longer enough that we are simply able to do things in a certain way very well. We have to be able to dynamically change the way in which we do things to respond to the needs of the marketplace. With dynamic business process management, your business processes themselves adapt continuously to changing business conditions. Dynamic business process management starts by allowing you to manage routine transactions dynamically without human intervention being required, and even common exceptions within defined limits. And those exceptions that fall outside of those limits require human intervention, but that can be handled via dynamic workflow. Dynamic workflow works like this. With dynamic business process management at its heart, information flows through an organization and processes without any unnecessary human intervention. But when human intervention is necessary, the system recognizes it and involves the correct people in making the decisions that they need to make with a minimum of impact on their time and productivity, and completes the process. Furthermore, as conditions in the business and in the external market change, the system is able to dynamically change the way in which information flows through your organization to enable you to take most effective advantage of what's happening in the world at any particular point in time. It's a new way of thinking about human-computer interaction. And in the past, all too often, those of you who have had to implement systems have learned about the difficulty of working with systems where the system will do anything you want it to do just as long as you do it exactly the way the system tells you you have to do it. With dynamic business process management, what we're saying is that it becomes a joint cognitive system where the humans are in charge, but the computer is able to actually help because the computer systems understand your business plans and goals and are able to proactively offer you assistance in achieving your objectives in the same way that a highly motivated, intelligent human assistant would be able to do. Any dynamic business process management system consists of two parts: the underlying dynamic system, which manages information in accordance with your business objectives, and the functional supervisor, who's responsible for setting goals for how the system and process work, managing exceptions, and optimizing the performance of the system using tools like dynamic workflow, business intelligence, and compliance monitoring. That's at the first level. But as you move up in the organization, what you see is that people with broader and higher levels of responsibilities are able to interact in much the same way, where certain exceptions that rise to their level of responsibility to resolve are routed to them automatically, and where they are able to set goals and optimize performance across entire processes, but still providing them the capability, whenever they choose to drill right down to the lowest level of detail in their systems and processes to find out exactly what's going on with any given business transaction. This is leading us toward dynamic global supply and demand chains. What we're seeing is a four-step process now. Business information enters into dynamic ERP systems like the SAP software that so many of you use today, which is capable of executing the operational transactions you need to manage your business on a day-to-day basis. That in turn passes critical summary information into dynamic business process management systems, which are able to reason about this information, to think about it in the same way that expert humans do, and determine optimal flows, actions, timing, measures, and pass that information back into the ERP systems that are then necessary to be able to actually execute those operational transactions, ultimately matching up information and product flows to consumptions of product and services. Some examples of companies that are moving in this direction: American dairy brands, for example, needed to analyze new product introductions. They needed more accurate demand forecasting to understand the impact of these new product introductions on their production capacity and on their supply chain. They put a collaborative demand planning system in place, working with their key customers, which increased their forecast accuracy, improved their safety stock calculations, increased customer service levels to in excess of 99%, and helped them meet customer demand more profitably. The result was a 15% increase in profits for the company in the first full year after they implemented this collaborative system. Valvoline and Advanced Auto Parts worked together to implement a collaborative planning, forecasting, and replenishment system, which enabled them to reduce the inventory of Valvoline motor oil at their distribution centers by over 30%, freed up over 200 pallet spaces, a 25% reduction, while at the same time they were able to maintain service levels, again, in excess of 99%, even through promotional periods. And those of you who are in or work with people in the retail industry understand that that's a very challenging goal to try to achieve. So what we're seeing is an evolution. Companies are moving from implementing dynamic business processes. Over the next few years, we're going to see the emergence of dynamic enterprises, organizations where all of the mission-critical business processes in the company are managed in this kind of dynamic, responsive, cognitive way, and leading to dynamic supply chains. One of the best examples of which is the global supply chain of Dell computers, where they integrate the manufacturing of parts and materials from all over the world so effectively that they actually manage the company on negative working capital. They're able to sell their products and collect the payments from their customers before the payment comes due for the parts and materials they purchase from their suppliers, because they're able to move that through their process so effectively. It's an extremely innovative approach. This is leading us ultimately in the direction, and I think we'll see emerging over the next 5 to 10 years, a global dynamic economy where parts and materials, products and services, money and information flow between organizations, across enterprise boundaries, across international boundaries, with no unnecessary human intervention in the process at all, but all in accordance with plans and goals established by management within individual companies and agreed upon between managers of trading partner companies. Now, to take our innovation story from the beginning of this presentation a step further, one of the things that happened was that by the 1990s, personal computers themselves were no longer a disruptive innovation as they had been 10 or 15 years earlier when Compaq Computer was able to take over digital equipment. But Dell's autonomic, dynamic global supply chain was in fact a disruptive process innovation that allowed them to take such a dominant position in the marketplace that Compaq itself got swallowed up by HP within a few years after Dell's implementation of this kind of technology-enabled innovation. So the transformation to dynamic processes looks like this. Our old legacy systems were monolithic. They stood alone. But today, most of your businesses, you're in the process of connecting your systems within the organization. and connecting your systems to those of your trading partners outside of your organization, tomorrow you'll be evolving toward dynamic, self-managing, cognitive business processes and systems to support them. Now, as we move into this kind of a global marketplace, things are happening more and more quickly. It becomes more and more difficult for any human to keep up with all of the details and to see the big picture at the same time. Managing the risks of business in a global market has become very challenging, and organizations are recognizing the importance of doing that, particularly driven by such factors as globalization, 9/11 and terrorism, hurricanes, the tsunami, corporate governance issues like Sarbanes-Oxley in the U.S. or Basel II in the European Union. But today in most companies, most risk is managed in isolated silos. Credit risk in the credit department, natural disasters in the insurance department, supply risk in the logistics or purchasing department. The problem is, when you have all of these different areas, the level of risk that each exposes the company to is different. And if the company as a whole, based on the expected return on investment that the stockholders are looking for, has an overall risk appetite that's a certain level, then it's easy to see in this particular example that at least one risk, our operational risk in the center, is far above what we want. And in fact, credit risk is actually too low. We're apparently turning down too much business in the effort to reduce our credit loss. So the recognition is emerging of the benefits of enterprise risk management. It's a capital allocation issue, and it's a way of allowing you not only to make sure that you're allocating capital to each of the right areas of your business to manage risk effectively, but also allowing you to manage those risks that emerge when different parts of the business each do what they think is the right thing, but together it can cause a problem. Enterprise risk management is the integrated identification, assessment, measurement, management, and continuous monitoring of trends, events, and situations which could impact an enterprise's ability to achieve its objectives. A book I'm going to very highly recommend to you is one by Ken McGee, who is a group vice president at the Gartner Group, called Heads Up: How to Anticipate Business Surprises and Seize Opportunities First. And he started by studying disasters of a variety of kinds over many years: natural disasters, terrorist attacks, business disasters, bankruptcies, and various kinds of activities like that. And he learned that in every single case that they looked at, the data was always there. We learned this the hard way in the U.S. after the September 11th attacks. All of the information was there to tell us what was going to happen, even how it might happen and where. It was just scattered in so many different places across so many different systems, processes, organizations, and levels of responsibility that no one was able to pull it all together. But the data is always there, and only a small amount of material information is typically needed to manage this effectively. Once those material data are identified, they can be captured and continuously monitored. These are the things we need to watch to keep track of this type of risk. What this kind of monitoring does is it allows you to predict the present. In most of our businesses, we spend lots of time and effort trying to predict what's going to happen in the future so we can be ready for it. How many of our product are people going to buy next week, next month, and so forth? But at the same time, in most of our businesses, if we knew exactly what was happening today, we would be able to manage our business much more effectively. by putting real-time systems in place that tell you exactly what's happening today, you don't eliminate the need for forecasting, but you dramatically reduce your reliance on accurate forecasts to manage your business more effectively. So real-time enterprise risk management lets you anticipate trends and events so you can adjust your tactics and your strategies to ensure that you meet your goals, avoid disasters, and identify and take maximum advantage of opportunities as they present themselves. In order to do this, you've got to have systems with a closed monitoring and planning loop. So here we have an individual manager, and on the upper right we have the real world. And information about the state of the world manifests itself in the form of signals which become observations. They may come from sensors of some kind. They may come from structured data files. They may come from information that a person reads in the newspaper or sees on television. Those observations are converted into structured data and passed into a system that can assess the situation and make a determination if there's something that a person needs to be notified about, and also if it's important to notify that part of the system that does the planning. Independently of whether or not a person has been notified, they can enter an expression of their intent, their desires into a system, and the planning part of the system, understanding your business's plans and goals, is then able to determine what is the appropriate actions to undertake at a particular point in time and pass that information into those systems that will enable you to bring about the changes in the outside world that you're trying to make happen. And of course, at the same time, the system has to be able to look for what are the changes that are resulting. So, for example, if you make a determination that we need to increase the level of our inventory because of the increased demand that we're seeing from these signals coming from the marketplace, the automated system, it's not sufficient for us to simply say, okay, increase the inventory to this level for this period of time, but you have to make sure that that increase was actually, in fact, put into effect. So what this means is that dynamic enterprise risk management requires you to have systems capable of understanding your enterprise's plans and goals, connecting the best available information from key sources and systems within your organization and in the outside world to identify potential threats to those plans and goals or potential opportunities to better achieve your business objectives. And then reason about, and what I'm talking about is having software that can think about these kinds of plans and objectives in the same way that an expert human manager can, to identify what courses of action will reduce risks or prevent unfortunate activities from happening, and where authorized, even implement those actions. Now, what this means is that you really have to have cognitive systems, systems capable of reasoning about information in the same way that people do. And the question I'm sure many of you have is, will we ever really see those kinds of technologies available? Let me show you an example. In my opinion, the most remarkable automobile race in the world is not the Indianapolis 500. It's not the 24 hours of Le Mans. It's not even the Grand Prix du Brésil. No, in my opinion, the most remarkable automobile race in the world is the Desert Challenge. 10 highly qualified vehicles racing for 300 kilometers over some of the most challenging terrain on the planet in the desert outside of Barstow, California. The winner in this particular race was a car built by Stanford University and therefore named Stanley. Here's a photograph of the car. Take a careful look at the car and its driver. Some of you are familiar with the Volkswagen saying, "Drivers wanted." But if you look over the back wheel, it says, "Drivers not required." This is not a remote control vehicle. This is a fully autonomous vehicle. It's not driven by human beings remotely. It drives itself. So let's go to race day. The vehicles had staggered starts. They started every few minutes. And you can see thousands of fans out early in the morning to watch the beginning of the race. And here we have Stanley taking its turn to go out. You can see it makes a slight course adjustment to pull over and go in front of the fans at the reviewing stand before it then heads out into the desert. Now here we see a chase truck behind it, but the truck's not controlling it. It's just following it to make sure no problems happen as it makes a turn onto a different desert road. Here is a unique occurrence in history, the first time in history that one autonomic vehicle catches up with and passes another autonomic vehicle. This will happen billions of times in the future, but this was the first time. Here you can see the actual laser guidance system used by Stanley being replayed as it approached the vehicle and swung to the left to pass it, leaving a clearance space of approximately 1 meter, which was what they estimated was appropriate for a safety factor in passing in this kind of a situation before the car then continued on into the desert. Now here we are about 200 kilometers into the race. And at this point, the car enters a very difficult and winding mountain road. Interestingly enough, all 5 of the cars that made it this far made it through what is called Bottleneck Pass. And you can see it's very challenging here. If the car makes a wrong turn, it's off into the canyon on the left. But in fact, this and the other 4 cars that finished the race all successfully navigated Bottleneck Pass. Here we see it finally approaching the finish line, and the judge at the finish line waving the checkered flag, just as if there was a human in the car that would understand what that meant. And then the car pulls up to the reviewing stands. On the upper right, we see the view from the car's own inside camera, so it can accept the applause of the audience as the winner of the race, finishing 300 kilometers through the desert in just under 7 hours, a speed of over 40 kilometers per hour through the entire process. Now, there's no doubt about it. There are some specific technologies here that are very sophisticated. The use of global positioning systems, the laser guidance system, sophisticated image recognition technology. All of those are necessary, but they're not sufficient, because there's no way this car could have navigated itself, even using those tools, without having the cognitive engine within the car. The ability to be able to think, to reason about what the objectives of the race are. The designers of the cars were only given the route of the race 2 hours ahead of time, so they could not pre-program all the turns that needed to be made. The car had to figure that out on its own, had to be able to think about those things, reason about them in the same way that a human driver can. And that same kind of technology is now beginning to move into the commercial business marketplace. You may ask, how can an inanimate system be intelligent? Well, it's got to be an active collector of information. It's got to proactively gather the information it needs when it needs it. It needs to be able to understand that there are multiple ways of achieving its goals and to seamlessly switch from one to another if one way isn't going to work. It needs to be able to understand its own thought processes. It needs to adapt its behavior, and it needs to be able to communicate effectively with other intelligent agents, whether those are embedded in the software of inanimate systems or the wetware of our own human brains. Now, here's an example of how this kind of technology could be applied in enterprise risk management. Here, for example, this particular system designed for an electrical utility industry has a dashboard that shows all of the major risks that company is facing at the moment based on a careful, reasoned analysis of trends, events, and situations within the company. Now, this kind of cognitive system is not something that is uniquely applicable to the electric utility industry. These concepts apply in your business, in any business, just as effectively. And these are the kinds of tools that people are going to need to have in place as they move ahead into the challenging area. The kinds of problems, these kinds of cognitive systems are critical for handling dynamic business process problems, especially, and if you have any of these challenges, especially if you have most of them. Do you have a limited number of capable experts in your company? Do you have large volumes of data? Complex arrays of actions that can be taken? And great pressures of response time, cost, or even danger? When all of these things come together, these kinds of systems make it much more manageable to control your business effectively. Getting back to basics is about getting back to the simple tasks of managing quality, speed, productivity, and customer service in your organization. But all too often we are distracted by the complexity of day-to-day activities in our businesses. And so, what we need to do, we can't avoid that complexity. But we learned over 50 years ago in the design of automobile transmissions that if you can hide the complexity of shifting gears inside of an automatic transmission, that it actually makes the job of driving the car much simpler for the human driver. The same thing applies to our businesses. We can't avoid the complexity, but by embedding the complexity within well-designed cognitive systems, we can make the job of driving the business much more effective for our human managers and executives. Nobody put this better, in my opinion, than former United States Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, who said, "I wouldn't give a fig for the simplicity this side of complexity, but I'd give my right arm for the simplicity on the far side of complexity." By putting systems in place that help us manage the day-to-day complexities of our organizations, we can get back to the simple goals and objectives we need to survive and succeed. So what do you need to do to develop your business technology strategy? Start by truly understanding your own business. Know what the real flows are through your business of parts, materials, products, cash, and information. Make sure you understand what you do, how you do it, and most importantly, why you do it. One of my rules of thumb is ask why 5 times. After you've gotten the answer to why, ask why that, and then why again. After 5 times, you're down to the real business issues. Understand how information could affect your industry in terms of the flows of parts, materials, products, cash, and information through your industry, and where that might pose competitive threats to you, and where it might provide strategic opportunities for your business. It is important to demonstrate the return on investment in technology, but don't be limited by it, because the financial bias can ignore such important issues as speed, quality, and customer satisfaction, the value that's created for partners. It often lends, when you take a purely financial, analytical view toward technology, leads you to those technologies that merely help you cut costs rather than grow revenues. But it's easy to cut costs. You want to cut costs? Send everybody home and close the doors. Cuts your costs to zero. Of course, it cuts your revenues to zero too, and your stockholders will not be very happy. It's not just about cutting costs. I can't think of a single company I've ever known that has shrunk to greatness. Instead, what you want to do is see how you can better serve the needs of your market and grow your revenues. And by the way, this is not just for the big guys. In fact, it's especially important that small and mid-sized businesses understand this. Most innovation comes from smaller and mid-sized businesses because they recognize a need to try to gain market share as opposed to simply protecting what they have today. And they're willing to pursue much smaller markets. A huge corporation might say, a market that's only 10 million reais per year? I don't have time for that. A small company says, yes, we'd be very happy with a piece of that. Technology is even more important for small companies because small companies don't have the capital to be able to fund inefficiencies. And by using technologies effectively, it can enable them to leapfrog larger companies, to jump over them more effectively. And smaller companies certainly can be much easier to change. The legacy systems are not so deeply embedded, so it's not so difficult and expensive as it can be with large enterprises. So, ignore the strategic applications of business technology only if you want to stay a small company. Or if you're already a big company, only if you want to become a small company. So the bottom line is simply this. It's time for change. Whether you're with a small company, a large company, a state government, the federal government, you need to change, and it's not enough to simply accept the need to change. It's not even enough to embrace change. You need to actively seek out change. Not just change for change's sake, but change in the way of identifying and understanding the best current and emerging technologies as tools to improve your business processes in the ways that will help you survive and compete most effectively in the evolving global economy. It can be difficult, but as the famous historian Henry Steele Commager pointed out so clearly, change does not necessarily assure progress. But progress implacably requires change. Make the changes that you need to make in your organization so you can survive and succeed in the global market of the future. Thank you for listening. Muito obrigado.
Thanks for watching this DVD. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to working with you.